Hey everyone, this video is going to be a breakdown of the various interpretations of the creation account from Genesis 1 through the first couple verses of chapter 2. Now, I'm not going to share my opinion on which of these I believe is the proper interpretation. Rather, the goal of this is simply to provide a broad overview of the various interpretations, and I understand that there's going to be plenty of details that I'm not able to cover, and there's also going to be some terminology that some people are going to disagree with on how it is used. That being said, let's go ahead and dive right in. The first view that we're going to look at is the 24-hour day view. This is also going to be associated with young Earth creationism, which is the idea that the Earth and the universe are anywhere from 6 to 10,000 years old. Now, the 24-hour day view is going to be the view that the days in Genesis 1 are consecutive 24-hour periods of time. They're going to get this from the phrase evening and morning, also the Hebrew word yom, which means day, associated with a number. The 24-hour day view and the young Earth creationism view are also going to pull the genealogical information, specifically from Genesis chapter 5, and then they're going to pick back up in Genesis chapter 11. And this is because this genealogical information contains ages of the individuals, such as how old they were when they died. Now, there's more to it than just this. This is just the general overview of it. But again, it's this idea that Genesis chapter 1 describes 6 literal 24-hour periods of time. And the popular people that you're going to see endorsing this, or probably the most popular person, is Ken Ham, who oversees Answers in Genesis, as well as the Ark Encounter. And if you see any type of creation science museums, they're going to largely hold the view of young Earth creationism. Now, there are going to be some museums out there that are going to be this day age model or the old Earth creationism model. The day age is this idea where rather than it being 6 24-hour periods of time, that the days of Genesis are a chronological description of the remote past, where each day corresponds to a very long period of time. So if I were to say that Peyton Manning was a great quarterback in his day, that obviously doesn't mean one 24-hour period of time. I'm rather using the word day to describe the entire era of Peyton Manning, and that's essentially what the day age view is going to hold. Now, a view that has been labeled synonymous with day age and used interchangeably with it, but that is actually slightly different, is going to be the progressive creation view. And this is the idea that creation occurred over 6 24-hour days, but these days were separated by long periods of time. Now, I know that the progressive creation view sounds very similar to the day age view, so I did make this graph to illustrate the differences because, again, I've seen them used synonymously, but I would argue, along with some scholarship, that they're not synonymous and they shouldn't be used that way. You can see here on this graph at the top, you've got the day age view, which we talked about. You've got the days of creation, or each day is actually a reference to a long period of time. Whereas progressive creation is you have 24-hour days, but that are separated by those blue blocks right there, which represent an undefined amount of time. So you can see that they are a little bit different. However, as I mentioned with the day age creation viewpoint, both of these views are going to fall under the old Earth creationism interpretation in Genesis, which essentially is going to state that the Earth is 4.2 billion years old or something along those lines, and the universe is going to fall somewhere within the terms of what the consensus scientific community recognizes as the age of the Earth and the age of the universe. Now, it's worth noting as well that within this old Earth creationism model, there is a theory known as gap theory, which is the idea that there are millions, potentially billions of years between Genesis 1:1 and Genesis 1:2. Not all old Earth creationists are going to hold to that particular viewpoint, but it is out there, and there are variations of it, such as the gap actually being between verses 2 and 3 rather than verse 1 and 2. Each one of these viewpoints that we've covered so far, both young Earth creationism, old Earth creationism, they're all going to use this Hebrew word yom as part of their defense. Certainly not all of their defense, but as part of the defense for how they are coming to their interpretation. So in the 24-hour day, or the young Earth creationist view, you have this idea that yom plus a number is used roughly 410 times within the Hebrew Bible, and it almost always indicates an ordinary day or a 24-hour period of time. However, on the flip side of that, you're going to get the day, age, and progressive creationists that are going to say it doesn't mean that every single time. So you cannot state that it must mean that when we see yom plus a number. Now, people will pull in evening plus morning as well. That's not a great strategy because the Hebrew phrase evening, then morning, and then yom occurring in that order occurs only one other time in Daniel chapter 8. And that is an indication where yom actually means a long period of time. But the day, age, and progressive creationists are also going to point to verses such as Genesis chapter 2, verse 4. So just one chapter later, really one verse later after this Genesis 1 creation account, where it states, "These are the generations of the heavens and the earth when they were created, in the day that the Lord God made the earth and the heavens." And so that term day, they're going to say, look, this term day right here, the Hebrew word yom, is actually used to describe all days from that initial creation account that you find in Genesis chapter 1 and a couple verses into chapter 2. So they're going to say that this just goes to show that yom doesn't mean a literal 24-hour period of time every single time that it's used, and that it doesn't have to be used that way within the creation account found in Genesis 1 through the first few verses of chapter 3. Now, to dive a little bit deeper into this Hebrew term yom, this is an image. Both of these images have been from Logos Bible Software. The first was actually just a lemma breakdown of the word yom. You can see right here that, yes, a large amount of time, it does mean days or day. It also has some additional meanings such as years, forever, daily times, etc. But when we look into what's known as the Bible Sense lexicon from Logos Bible Software, this is a lexicon that's organized around the sense or the meaning of words and takes into account how they are used in original language context. And so when you see the word yom used, you get this, majority of the time it's going to be used day. And when you see sunset in parentheses right there, that just indicates sunset to sunset, that idea of evening and then morning from Genesis chapter 1. However, the second most common usage you see here is this period or day of time, and this just represents an undefined amount of time. You've also got a year that this can be used, an age that it can be used, or just simply the daylight. In other words, about the 12 hours of daylight, not including that nighttime. So you can see there's a wide variety of senses in which this word is used. People are going to point to this and many different views they hold to argue against that 24-hour view that the young earth creationists hold. And people also use this to argue against the day, age, and progressive creationist account or interpretations of Genesis 1 as well. Now, moving on from young earth and old earth creationism, we get literary framework. And this is the view that the days of Genesis do not describe a linear sequence of 24-hour days, but rather the days are structured according to a forward symmetry or a parallel pattern. Now, you will see some people say that forward symmetry is not the same as parallel pattern. You will see some people that say they are synonymous. I'm just going to use them synonymously because that's how I've seen it used. But you can see right here, I've got this ABC and then ABC repeating. This is the pattern in which scholarship has recognized Genesis chapter 1 to be written in these days, particularly days 1 through 6, where days 1 through 3 address the problem of disorder, and God organizes the cosmos into distinct realms. And then days 4 through 6 then supply each of these realms with their appropriate inhabitants. So if we actually look at Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, you get in the ESV, and the earth was without form and void. And those words without form and void actually form a rhyming pattern in the Hebrew text. It reads, the land was tohu vavohu. And it literally just means chaotic and uninhabited. Scholarship is in disagreement about what these words actually mean, but they're largely in agreement that it does mean some form of wildness, unorderliness, wasteland, or somewhere that is uninhabited. And so essentially what you get is days 1 through 3, God tackling the unordered state, the chaotic state to bring order. And then in days 4 through 6, he brings inhabitants to those realms where there were no inhabitants before. And so if we look at day 1 compared to day 4, day 1, you've got the separation of light from darkness, day and night. And so the realm of the sky is created. So God has taken that chaotic state and he's made it orderly. And then in day 4, you've got inhabitants for the realm of the sky, the host of the sky placed in the realm of the sky, the sun, the moon, and the stars to rule over the day and the night. And then in days 2 and 5, day 2, you have the separation of the waters, both below and above. So you've got the realm of the skies and the sea being formed. So you've got that chaotic state being brought to order. And then in day 5, both of these realms, the skies and the sea, are filled with their inhabitants. You've got the sea creatures below and you've got the birds above. And you get this phrase, this is true for days 1 and 4 as well. You get it here in days 2 and 5. And there was evening and there was morning, the first day, the second day, third day, fourth day, fifth day, etc. And then in days 3 and day 6, you have not one creative act, but 2 creative acts in both instances. You've got a bonus creative act. So in day 3, again, that chaotic state is overcome with order. The dry land emerges from the sea. And this corresponds to on day 6, where the land is filled with creatures. So the realm of the land being formed on day 3, and then the land gets its inhabitants. However, as I mentioned, there's that bonus act. So the bonus act on day 3, you've got vegetation that produce seed. You've got fruit trees that make fruit according to its kind. And then this correlates to the second act of creation on day 6, which is humans, which are placed to rule over the creation. And what's really interesting about this is that humans and trees are deeply connected within the biblical text, and it all goes back to this day 3 and day 6 structure from Genesis 1. Now, this isn't a video on that. We'll do a video on that in the future, but that is why you get a lot of human and tree language in both the New Testament and the Old Testament. And again, here on day 3 and day 6, you get this phrase, and there was evening and there was morning. It is worth mentioning that this parallel pattern or forward symmetry literary style is not the only literary style that we see within Genesis chapter 1. There are an immense amount of chiasms within Genesis 1 as well. And if you look at the overall structure of these chiasms with the forward symmetry, what you will actually find is that Genesis 1 has been brilliantly and intentionally designed in its literary structure. What is also unique about this is that scholarship has actually recognized there is also a climactic finish to this. You can see on the screen here the D on that ABC, and that is because day 7 is recognized as the climactic Sabbath on which God accomplishes or finishes the creative act that he had begun. And you also do not get this phrase, and there was evening and there was morning on the 7th day. It simply does not occur. And there are scholars that will draw to the fact that this indicates that God has actually remained in his 7th day rest, that paradise rest, that when humanity got banished from the garden, humanity lost that rest. And essentially one of the main themes in the Bible is to return to that rest. And that is, again, both true in the Old Testament as well as the New Testament, such as Hebrews chapter 4. And we'll cover this a little bit more in one of the other viewpoints, and it'll make more sense once we talk about what rest is. But for now, we'll move on to the analogical viewpoint. This one's pretty simple and straightforward. And this is simply that these 6 days of creation are an analogy for the normal human work week preceding the Sabbath. So this idea, again, that the Sabbath is the climactic finish, but that the 6 days of creation are essentially a model for humanity. And what it's truly meant to indicate is that the 6 days of the work week are when you tackle the chaos and disorder in your own life and bring about order to it so that you can rest on that Sabbath when it arrives. Now, the next view is the revelatory days view. This view is that the 6 days of creation are 24-hour periods, but creation did not occur on those days. Rather, these are the days in which God revealed how he created to the writer of Genesis chapter 1. And a scholar that's done some work on this is Dr. Dwayne Garrett. He wrote a book called Rethinking Genesis, and this is largely dealing with the documentary hypothesis or the JEPD theory. If you're interested in that, I would recommend this book. It's a really good book. But what he points out in this book very briefly is that you have this 6+1 literary pattern in Genesis chapter 1. The only other occurrence that this literary pattern of 6+1 occurs is in Revelation, where it occurs 3 times. So that's where you get this revelatory days view. However, as Dr. Garrett points out, there is one other place where you see this 6+1 pattern, although it's not a literary pattern. It's a historical account, and it is from Exodus chapter 24, verse 16. This is actually where Moses is called up to the mountain of God, and for 6 days the cloud covered the mountain, but on the 7th day, Moses went up the mountain into the cloud for 40 days and remained there alone with God. And what Dr. Garrett theorizes or speculates within his book is that these 7 days, this 6+1 pattern that we see here, are actually the days of divine revelation to Moses, and those are the days that you see reflected in the creation account in Genesis chapter 1. Next, we have the polemic view, and yes, you will see a model of the flat earth here instead of the globe. And that is because the polemic view is a creation account that depicts an ancient, pre-scientific cosmology, not a modern 21st century scientific understanding of how the universe operates. So you can see this is quite different from the young earth creationism and the old earth creationism views. But essentially this polemic view, the purpose of it is to assert which deity deserves credit for creation while denigrating the claims of rival deities associated with the cosmology and its descriptive elements. So essentially, within the ancient Near East, you've got this snow globe cosmology. This is roughly going to be the same cosmology all across the ancient Near East at the time of the biblical authors. And so because of this shared cosmology model, what you have is the biblical writer making a polemic account, which a polemic is just an aggressive verbal attack. And so it's a polemic creation account, essentially giving the God of the Bible the credit for all of creation rather than the rivaling deities of these surrounding religions and cultures. And scholarship will draw a lot of similarities between the Genesis creation account and other rivaling cultures of that time, specifically the creation accounts found within Babylon as well as Egypt. And if you're curious about this, I will throw some links to some articles and papers, commentaries, etc. in the description below. And a view that's very similar to the polemic view and often goes hand in hand with it, people often hold both of these views together, is the cosmic temple view. And this is the idea that Genesis chapter 1 describes God creating his cosmic temple. And that is because a temple in the ancient world was built so that a deity could have a center for his rule. And this is actually a quote from biblical scholar Dr. John Walton in his book, The Lost World of Genesis 1. And he states regarding the creation account found in Genesis chapter 1, that God's rest is about God's presence taking up its rest within a sacred space by filling it with his divine presence. Creation is depicted as the cosmic temple, filled with God's presence on the climactic Sabbath. And this goes with the idea that is recognized by scholars that rest is the result of crisis being resolved, stability being achieved, or when things have settled down. And that also divinity or a deity can only rest within a temple. And the term rest, when we look at the biblical text, does not refer to rest how we view it today, where you might lay down and take a nap or something like that, but rather rest means to take up residence or to take up rulership within all that you have established order over. And so when you get that idea of chaos and disorder within Genesis 1, 2, and then you see days 1 through 6 accomplishing chaos over that order, this cosmic temple view goes hand in hand in the view of scholars with what Genesis 1:2 is introducing. And when we take all of these interpretation viewpoints that we've looked at, we can break these down into two broad categories, and that is the category of science and non-science. When we look at young earth creationism and old earth creationism, this is trying to make a modern understanding of science compatible with the biblical text and show that the biblical text is in fact giving a scientific description of creation. Whereas the literary framework, analogical, revelatory days, polemic, and cosmic temple are writing to the understanding of the audience of the time. And this is an incredibly hot topic within the creation conversation. It does not matter which side of the belief spectrum that you fall on. And speaking of hot topics, one thing I did not cover in this, because it actually falls under multiple interpretations that we looked at, is this idea of theistic evolution, which is the idea that evolution is real, but that it was set in motion by God. I do want to point out as well that you can have a mix of different views. We've talked about polemic and cosmic temple going pretty hand in hand together. I would say a lot of people that hold that polemic view are going to hold the cosmic temple view as well. And that's just to say that if you hold one of these views, it doesn't mean that you can't hold any of the other viewpoints. There is a wide variety of mixture, both inside and outside of scholarship as well. But the one defining factor that is going to determine which category that an individual falls under is how Genesis 1:1 is interpreted. And if you're curious on that, I've done a video on that. You can check it out on the channel. It is called The Mistranslation of Genesis 1:1 and Why It Matters. All right, everyone. I hope this video was both informative and helpful in explaining the various ways in which people can and do interpret the creation account as depicted in Genesis chapter 1. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and I'll see you on the next one. Thanks so much.